Hi guys, Matt Rowe here, and welcome to the Zwift Coaching Podcast, episode 19, with of course Greg and Kev.
Hey Matt, hey Kev, good to be back again, and let's get into it.
Yeah, hi guys. Like I say, great to be back, and let's talk about the world.
Absolutely. Well, podcast 17 was an Innsbruck World Special, where we spoke to some interesting people, as hopefully you listened to that podcast. But what we didn't do was comment and share our view on some of the points that the pros made. So that's what today's podcast is all about. So just to recap, in episode 17, we spoke to Tim Wellens, Tony Gallopin, Peter Kenyuk, Brent Brookwalter, Michael Valgren, Rob Power, Danny Rowe, and Hannah Barnes, amongst some of the juniors as well. And what we've done is pulled a line or two from each rider as they made an interesting point, and then me, Greg, and Kev are going to discuss what's been said. So the first comment came from Danny Rowe, and it was about positioning. So here's Danny's comment.
Positioning is going to be absolutely key in this race, making sure I'm at the front, at the bottom of the steep climb, so I don't have to fight my way to the front on what's already going to be a tough section of the race.
So as we know, guys, positioning, absolutely key. It's not just the strongest, but it's the smartest, and positioning is obviously important.
Absolutely. So that's what we were talking about is, when you enter the bottom of a technical climb, or if you enter the bottom of a climb in a huge bunch, you can save so much energy. I mean, knowing that as a sprinter, I always used to start the climbs at the front of the bunch, because it gave you, in a huge bunch, it gave you at least a kilometre or a kilometre and a half of sag room where you could actually climb your own pace, recover, and then hang on to the pace that the peloton was doing. So positioning is, like, for us, as a sprinter, you have to start at the front, and to be fair, as a sprinter, it's not difficult to get to the front. But then, it's when the pace goes on, that's when you're in obviously big trouble. But it's really, really important to start as close to the front as possible.
Yeah, when they were going through the circuits in town, they were actually single file going through some of those climbs at the bottom there, weren't they?
Absolutely. Of course, all those bends who come out of a bend, and it may not be that sharper bend, but the front riders are not even freewheeling, they're pedaling, kind of coming out of that bend on the gas straight away. 20 wheels back, there's a slight touch of brakes, and at the back, they're going to be on the brakes quite heavily. So you've got the strongest riders at the front who are better positioned, and I guess some of the weaker riders at the back, and obviously the difference between stronger and the weaker riders just grows. But yeah, through the centre of town was single file the whole way. And for me, just thinking about positioning into climbs, you've got the climbers positioning themselves well, and they're obviously the quickest up the climbs. You've got the strongest riders in the best position at the bottom of the climbs. If you're not positioned well, you haven't got a chance unless you're a real top climber.
Sorry, mate. I was just going to say, I think what you'll find actually is, like, if there was, say for example, if I rode the Worlds, I would be there riding for one person that actually can climb. So my job would be, because I'm good through the peloton, I can get to the front at the right position, and I'd be looking after George Bennett, the little Kiwi guy who climbs incredibly. He just follows me, and I use energy. I may pass some people in the wind, I may use some energy to get to the bottom of the climb, but I know that I've got George behind me, and he's not touched the wind, and he climbs perfectly and in good position, and he doesn't have to stress with the accelerations. The stop goes, and it's up to me to make it as many laps as possible.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my point too, Greg, and it's good that you mentioned that, but it can also be quite frustrating sometimes for riders like yourself that are domestics for the climbers, because if you have a climber that can't hold position, it means you have to go back many more times and bring them up to the front a lot more, doesn't it?
I wouldn't say frustrating, mate, because I'm never going to make it. But no, it's you get there, the World Championships, you're there for one rider or two riders maybe. New Zealand, you're only there for one rider. So it's definitely like 100% would be absolutely happy to be there to do my job. You saw Sam Bewley, he did it for 120, 130 Ks. You saw George didn't even leave Sam Bewley's wheel. So it was just like, that's your job. That's the reason you're there for those worlds. So it's just it's not frustrating. It's just one thing you're good at, and then he's obviously good at climbing. So there's so many different skills in cycling. It just shows, again, there's so many different attributes that make a good cyclist.
Yeah, and we've spoken about it before. Matt Heyman and my brother Luke as well, their role in the Tour de France, obviously they're not going to win the Tour. They're purely going there to support their team leaders. I think the Roubaix stage was a great example of, sacrifice, but also positioning. Matt Heyman, a world-class rider in terms of positioning skills and all that, and same with Luke. And just their role on that stage, get their team leader to the right place at the right time, out of danger. And it's as well about staying safe, right? Out of danger, less risk of crashing if you're at the front. And just before we move on, this concept of positioning is not just an in real life concept. It applies to Zwift as well. So I'm just thinking about the kind of the small volcano loop. There's only a small little kicker each time up as you go into the volcano. But if you're kind of a couple of wheels back, 10, 20, 30 wheels back in a race, the elastic will snap and you'll enter that volcano and you'll see gaps ahead of you and you'll see riders ahead. And as we all know, it is brutally hard to close a 5-10 meter gap in real life and on Zwift. So it's this positioning concept applies everywhere. All right. Well, the next chat is a comment from Hannah Barnes, and she's commenting about the team time trial preparation. So here's Hannah's comment.
Yeah, it was really nice. It's an event that we really like. It's just such a team-orientated event, and I think we only spent about 2 weeks. We did the course 9 times actually, so we know it pretty well. But yeah, I think it came down to what equipment we had. We had Shroud and Zip, and Penning gave us really great equipment for that race. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
There you go. So I think what Hannah's basically saying, knowledge is king. If you don't prepare, you're preparing to fail.
Yeah, and the results speak for themselves there, don't they? With the win that Hannah and her team had there with the World Championships. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's all about knowing what to expect. Technically, where can you push full gas? Where do you need to pace it? What bends do you need to freewheel around? What bends can you hit full gas? All this type of stuff. And you may think, freewheeling around a bend versus pedaling. What's that? A split second, half a second maybe. But obviously, over a long event, it all adds up.
And like we spoke about in I think another podcast, many moons ago, was like the positioning of the strong person. The second strong. It's all about positioning of the team as well. So that can add to the fluency of a team, the harmony of a team. You can't have one really strong person destroying a team. So it's vitally important that everyone works in harmony.
Yeah, and just thinking actually on the weekend I went mountain biking and done 2 laps of this course, and on Strava.
I saw that, mate. It was a piss poor effort, mate. That was just ridiculous.
So I did crash. So that's the bit you saw probably. My Instagram on my mate's Instagram of me crashing. But done 2 laps of this course, and on Strava, I obviously put it on Strava. It's clear as day. I went quicker down all the descents on the second lap simply because I knew them. I guess I built up a bit of confidence, but I knew what to expect. Or I knew roughly what was coming. I.e., there's no big drop-offs and the like. So that's that concept of knowing what's coming, knowledge is king, preparing is all really important. And if you're looking at kind of your local race, if you're doing a race and it does a load of local laps and then turns off up a finishing climb, say, it is 100% worth figuring out what that climb is like. Go and ride it or maybe drive up it. Just to get a feel. So knowledge really is king in bike racing,
mate. And to extend on that, you'll notice actually in the World Tour, like if you actually take a look, you'll notice some World Tour riders are actually really, really good at circuit races versus a one-day point-to-point race. You'll notice the difference. Once they learn that race, once they know how long it is to the top of that hill, how much further, where that corner is to the top of the hill, I guarantee you, if you notice, there's that many World Tour riders that are so much better at a circuit race than they are on a point-to-point, just because mentally they know what's coming up. So it's a massive, massive advantage, that psychological, that mental advantage.
Good on. So, Next comment we had from Rob Power, and he's talking about training on Zwift before the Worlds.
Yeah, we were doing a lot of those climbing days. We'd do 3 hours on the road, and then we'd have a bit of a break, and then in the afternoon get on there and do 2 hours just riding the circuit. So where you had a bit of fatigue in the legs, and yeah, no, it was really, really good to do that. I think it'll be good for Sunday. So.
I think you know better than anyone, Kev, the benefits of using Zwift for double days. And obviously, you coach Rob Power.
Yes, as you mentioned there, I coach Rob, and we prepared for the World Championships using Zwift quite predominantly. And Rob's, even though he's a young guy, he's a big believer and fan of training on Zwift. He's used it for races earlier in the season, like Strada Bianchi and some other events like that. And look, performance-wise, Rob had a great race on the day. He did his job for the team. In fact, he was the last teammate there for Jack Haig. He was there until the last lap. And we definitely know the benefits that came from training on Zwift. We spoke about knowing the course. He knew the climb like the back of his hand. He knew how to dose his effort and so on. But for me, the real story with Rob and his preparation for Worlds actually comes after that, because he then went on to win Japan Cup. So he gained some great form by training indoors and then going to Worlds, and he carried that form into the weeks afterwards and had another win there, which was great.
Yeah, absolutely. That shows, the development you get from just training so deep and so perfect. I think it's what I call it was like perfect training. There's no junk. You're not wasting it. I know you're still doing the hours because you're professional. You're doing 4, 5, 6 hours, but it's absolutely spot on. When you use Zwift, you're not wasting any time, and then that's what helps you carry on that form for the rest of the season. He probably didn't even have to train that much. He probably just had to keep the legs ticking over, but because he'd done so much work and so much specificity, his form's just going to carry on for the rest of the season. And then you see him he just cleaned up Japan Cup. It was an incredible victory.
Yeah, well, you talk about volume there. Like heading into the World Championships, which is a 260k race, almost 7 hours of racing there. He was doing 5-hour sessions, 3 hours on the road, followed by 2 hours on Zwift straight after the road session, just to get used to those climbs. And he knew every metre of the major climb, every gradient, how it changed, and when to put the pressure on and when he could save a bit of energy. So just that knowledge of the course was really paramount in his performance on the day.
Perfect. And Rob, how old is he? How old is Rob? Is he like 21? What is he?
He's 23.
Wow.
23. Like, he's just a kid, isn't he? And look how well he went. Like, top 20 in the world. He's just incredible.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it's an easy way, these split days and using Zwift, it's an easy way to get your head around this training. Obviously, and I think the way Rob's done it, the way you prescribed, Kev, doing 3 hours in the morning, then 2 hours in the afternoon, and the 2 hours in the afternoon on Zwift, I think you mentioned is just riding the circuit when you've got that fatigue on the legs. And you just let that afternoon session take care of itself, really.
But yeah, there's so many, just between the three of us, there's so many different beliefs now out there. And what the scientific research says, I don't know if I even fully agree with it.
There we go. All right, next comment we had from Tony Galapan and Pete Kenyuk. We got 2 comments here, and they're both on the same topic of gear selection. So here's the two comments.
39, 32, always. I never use 36 even in a Vuelta. I always keep the 39.
36, 30, and because we had an option to go 32, but I just said if you're in the 32, then you're probably not going to be the fast enough. So I was like, don't worry about it.
Well, interesting views there, and essentially it's I didn't want to put too easy a gear on because if I go for that easier gear and I use it, I'm not in the race. Yeah, in interesting views, and I probably would go more down the route of, especially for amateurs, put whatever gear you need to get up the climb. I guess for pros, you can understand the view. If you need a lower gear, you're not in the race. What's the point? But for amateurs, often the goal is simply just to get up a climb at any speed, in which case I would say there's not really too low a gear.
Well, you guys rode the course in training before the race, and you made the comment too about the front wheel popping up. So obviously, the smaller the gear you have, the more crank torque, so the more chance of popping that front wheel up you're going to have. And like you say, for the guys to be in the race, they can't under-gear themselves. So for the professionals, it's an easy choice to ride the gear to keep them in the race. But as you said, Matt, for the amateurs, whatever's going to get you over the climb, obviously the best option.
Yeah, so I got a funny story about old Tony Gallopin. He was my roommate for about 4 years, and he's always been a 1 week racer, and then he tried to transform to have a crack at the Tour. But I remember I arrived at Paris-Nice one year, and I just asked about his training, and he's got this really French accent, and his English isn't super. And I said, how's the training? Have you been at altitude, mate? And he goes, oh, I haven't been to altitude, but I've been spending many days in the tente. And he goes, it's many days in the tente. It's many days in the tente. I'm like, mate, what's the tente? I have no idea what the tente is. So he goes, the big plastic thing with no oxygen. I went, oh, the tent. You've been in the tent, mate. The altitude tent. Yeah, the altitude tent. I just laugh and laugh and laugh when I see Gallopin. He's such a legend, and he loves rugby. And the poor thing, he always gets beaten by the All Blacks. So I feel, hey, Tony, if you're listening, mate, I'm sorry. I know we're going to destroy you next time we see you. But yeah, I also think, no, to be fair, I think that's a typical, I almost feel that's old school belief, like I remember mechanics going, if you can't get up the hill here on a 23, you're not going to be in the race. And I'm like, hey, dude, I know I'm not going to be in the race. I want to save my legs so I can sprint the next day. Put a 27 on the back for me, please. So here's the thing again. It's that high torque. It's like when we talked about those recovery rides and we try to do them nice and easy, but you still have to go uphill and you're still putting a lot of torque on the legs. It's not recovery. So here we are. We're going up this climb, and this is not a usual steep pitch. This is not a 200, 300 meter steep pitch. This is 900 meters steep. So it's like, I think put the smallest gear possible you could ever ride. And I mean, look at Dan Martin. He had a 34, 32 on, and he just knew. And George Bennett had 34, 32. It's like, because you still have to do a certain RPM to be able to produce watts. It's not about torque anymore. It's about wattage. At the end of 260 kilometers, it's about absolutely trying to turn those pedals over. So I just think Gallopin was being a little bit too much French, and if I'd have been in his team, I probably would have punched him in the head and said, mate, put a smaller gear on. But unfortunately, I only got to punch him in the head after the race.
And just think about gears. Most people go to your local bike shop, you buy a bike, and on that bike comes 53, 39, or 53, 32, 42, sorry, and you get an 11, 25 on the back. That's pretty standard. But that's just what the manufacturers produce en masse and then sell us. So if you're going to go buy a bike and you walk into a bike shop and it's got a 25, 27 on the back, and you live in a really hilly area or you can do some big climbs, get that cassette change for sure. And as we're all agreeing, just get the right gears that are going to give you, put you in that kind of 70, 80, 90 revs a minute range, going up long steady climbs. So if you've got real steep 10% climb and you're stuck on a 25, you've got to be a fit rider to kind of keep in the kind of the most efficient pedaling cadence range. So look at the demands of the event and the type of riding you do.
My last year as pro, I just said to the mechanic, do not take the 28 off all season. Even it was like, we've got 11 gears now. Don't take just leave me 28-11. I'm happy all season.
There we go. All right, next comment is from Michael Valgren, who's obviously very featured very highly in the race towards the end, kind of animated it. And here's a comment from Michael on pacing.
So when I tried to do the climb like steady and not go over my limits, but in the end I couldn't even do my limits, so I was just tired like everybody else. So yeah.
Great words there from Michael, and I think the message is, a climb of the gradient and length of the worlds, where it's up around 30%, you might be able to go maybe 0.2 of a kilometre an hour faster, but your legs will fill full of lactic and you'll basically grind to a stop. So you basically got to find your own little rhythm.
Well, can you imagine, just for a second, you've attacked the world's peloton, you're off the front, you're about 5 kilometres from the finish line. Unfortunately, 2.5, 3 kilometres is vertical, but it'd be so easy just to go just above your limit, just I'm sure on the flat there he was well above his limit. And then it's just like, right, I'm going to hit this climb but then all of a sudden, you can't even hit threshold. You're 260 kilometers in. You've gone above your limit to put a gap on the peloton, and he had a great gap. It looked really promising. And then all of a sudden, he's like, I can't even ride my limit anymore. I can barely get up this thing. So I really felt sorry for him. He's such a good kid, and he's a dangerous. Look at the races he's won. It's like he's such a dangerous guy on his own, and he just said I just literally could not even ride on my limit. It was that steep, and I'd gone that far above my limit. It was just so hard, that final climb.
He's a very exciting bike rider, and I think we're going to see a lot more of him in the future, aren't we?
And just thinking back for your listeners now, if you picked yourself at the end of a really long ride, maybe you've done on the weekend, you're coming back into your hometown and you've blown, I just find I just want to ride kind of on my own at my pace in silence, and kind of to ride, push 10 watts harder than I'm comfortable with, just sends you into a massive spin. It's a huge effort that your body just can't do. Your muscles, your fibers are basically being torn apart. You're in bits. You've got no more energy left. You're totally depleted of that glycogen, or you're working on your fat. And I think that's what Michael's saying there is just, pacing is, you cannot go above that limit. You're so tired at the end of a long bike race, whether it's the World's 260k, or whether it's your local chipper, or whether it's a club run. When you are done, when you're on the limit, you've got to be really careful and kind of ride within your means. Otherwise, you're just gonna blow the top off, and it's game over.
And Kev, you blow the top off walking down to the coffee shop, don't you, mate?
Yeah, obviously not very fit at the moment, so thanks for bringing that up.
Blow the top off.
Too much travelling.
Too much travelling. We got a good chance to get some training in Kev Kev, Greg, and myself for the Power Up training camp coming up soon. That's gonna be a cracker. Get some form for Christmas.
Blow the top off.
Absolutely right. Next comment is from Tim Wellens, and also from Pete Kenyuk again. So this is all about teamwork, I guess, and changing plans during a race. So here's the comments from Tim and Pete.
Yeah, indeed, we want to do something with the team from 5 laps to go, but the level was so high and the tempo was so high, it was not possible to anticipate. So we just had to follow, and everybody was suffering just in the peloton.
We're kind of just, with 2 to go when I first attacked to kind of just make it with the plan of making it hard for Simon, really, but without radios, you don't know. I hadn't spoke to anyone. So then I went back after that attack and seen Adam, and obviously Simon wasn't there, and he was like, oh yeah, he wasn't feeling good. And Adam said, I'm kind of feeling quite average, so just do our own race kind of thing. And then
obviously the tricky thing about the Worlds this year was there's no race radios. So these guys were, Peter alluded to, they're kind of riding blind in many senses.
Well, you can hear from Tim's comment. It was just like it wasn't like a normal Worlds. I think, do you know what I think as an ex-pro, and like if I was a sports director or a coach in another team, I'd still be worried about Sagan. You can't ever write him off. So everyone, even we spoke about it, Kev, Matt, we spoke like, you've got to make it hard early to get rid of Sagan. So I think every team in the back of their mind had that as well. It's like, right, let's make it hard early. So you see, Tim said it was just, you couldn't make a plan. It was just so hard, so early. And you either made it or you didn't. And of course you could see Sagan pulled off early, and accomplishment done, number one. You just saw guys falling off the back, and all of a sudden, it wasn't like literally a group attacked and stayed away. It was more just people fell off the back and the front group established. So that just shows how hard the race was.
How would you communicate, Greg, if in a race with no race radios? What's the best way to get it? So you got a group of say 6 teammates. How would you kind of communicate amongst all those 6 teammates?
Well, what we normally do is we have 2 guys that have 3 guys to talk to. So if we're looking after, it depends how many guys you're looking after. So there might be 2 guys working for 3, or there might be 3 guys working for 2. Depends how many on your team. So for New Zealand, it's no problem. You're only there for George. But Italy, for example, there'll be 3 guys looking after 2 guys. So, and then that's all. Their only job is put them in position, let them know when their move is, let them know if your teammate made the move. So it's about 3 guys. Their job is not only positioning, but it's about the communication, the gaps, holding position at the front, so that, say for example, Nibali, he doesn't have to worry about what's going on. He's got a mate who's watching the front, following attacks, and letting people know how many's up the front, and that's how you do it.
There's no real, tricks or ways of kind of getting messages across. So say there's a change in circumstance or a crosswind coming up, or it's simply you just got to drop back and find your riders, just talk. Simple as that, eh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, but you can't talk to all 8. It can't be one guy looking after 7 bike riders. It has to be split jobs, split communication. And you got guys around the course also. You've got timekeepers, you've got guys giving wheels, bottles around the course, so they can give you a time gap, because it's always nice to know a time gap, because obviously I can't tell George what the time gap is if I was looking after George. So it's nice to hear it's 2.5 minutes. Okay, nothing to worry about, 2.5 minutes. Oh, it's 15 minutes. Oh shit! I hope Italy and Spain start chasing soon, because we're going to be in big trouble. So it's about delegation of labour, basically.
We spoke about positioning earlier, and with races without radios, it does involve a lot more moving around in the bunch for the riders. Just to communicate the messages and what's happening in the race. So when there's no radios, it means a lot more fighting for position and moving around the bunch as well.
Yeah, and Kev, in your role as a coach at World Tour level, do you play any role in kind of the tactician side of things and planning, race planning, or is it purely the physical preparation?
Nah, it's just purely physical. Our job is to prepare the riders, and we hand them over to the directors, and they do all the directing in the race. They often ask for riders that are ready or suitable for certain races, but once they get in the team car, the directors certainly take over.
So it's when it all goes
in a nice
when it
way.
all goes pitong, you blame the tacticians, and the tactician blames the coach.
Yeah, although it's funny you mention that, because when things don't go well, the first person who gets blamed is the coach, and when things do go well, the director takes all the accolades. So
I was just going to say, and doesn't the director make some mistakes? Sometimes I used to pull my earpiece out.
Yeah, because I think kind of the role of a coach, I guess, at a more amateur level is probably everything combined. So it's not just to make you physically stronger, but working on the mental side of things too. So it's almost kind of a psychiatrist and a shoulder to lean on, and a bit of a tactician. So again, some of the riders I coach, they're doing their first ever race, and they're kind of saying, right, well, how do I do it? Like how long should I spend warming up? How should I start the race? Should I ride at the front? Should I ride at the back? So I guess that's one of the things as an amateur coach is kind of you're more that just more of a mentor, as well as getting them physically strong. It's that kind of mentor side of things as well.
Yeah, although on that, Matt, I did have a director during the season raise the issue with a certain rider that physically they were very good, but in terms of reading a race and tactics and so on, they lacked some experience there. They asked to put some strategies in place in training to overcome that, and to be honest, I didn't have a whole lot of ideas. Like, how do you train for race strategy when you're training predominantly by yourself? I know you can get group rides and practice things that way, but it really just comes down to experience.
Yeah, and that's why I always say riders who have been cycling for since a young age, you've kind of got that, that tactical awareness and the bike handling skills. As a kid, you absorb all like a sponge. You can often tell those riders who have been doing it since a young age, and those who come into it a little bit later in life.
There's always that, you can always identify with an athlete their peak mental arousal level. Some people like to be on edge, and that's when they compete at their best. Some people like to be more relaxed and calm, and that's when they compete at their best. But as long as they go tip over into critical failure, which is that area where there's actually no coming back. You can't do imagery, you can't do relaxation, you can't do breathing techniques, or it's there is a certain stage once you learn the rider what will actually put them in a peak mental state. So it's there is definitely methods that you can employ once you know the riders well, that will put them in the right mental state. And I think so. I've been studying a lot lately. Sports psychology, and I really, because I used it a lot when I was an athlete, and I really believe it's, your brain is one of the strongest muscles in the body. Like if you believe, if you're happy, if you're confident, if you're relaxed, if you're not, your anxiety levels are just optimal, you can perform way better than the next person beside you that's nervous, upset, anxious. It's like that's the reason I did sports psychology this year. I did advanced sports psychology, and it's just incredible the difference the mindset can make. And I mean, if you actually sit down and speak to the top athletes, you'll notice that they actually employ a lot of the techniques that I studied this year without knowing that they're actually a technique. So like, how to relax, how to visualize what's going to happen, where the crosswind's going to happen. Okay, what position do I have to be in? That's called visualization. They're like, I don't know, that's called visualization. I just know I have to be about here. I have to be in the correct... They don't know it has a name, and then they're just chilling out with the headphones on. Okay, that's mental relaxation. That's called, making sure their anxiety levels are at a low point, because you don't want to be anxious for 2 hours before the race, So it was a really interesting topic because, I hate talking about myself, but I was an elite athlete the same, and it was really nice to put a name to the things that I used to do as an elite athlete. So now I have a name to, I used to chill out, well, that's called, relax. I used to visualize the race. I like to think about where I had to be at the right time at the right place. Yeah, that's mental imagery. There's all these things that I used to just do off the back of the cuff. I didn't know they had a name to it. So there is actually a place for sports psychology. There's no question.
So Greg, from your experience racing in the World Tour, would you say that the road captain is the rider that possesses most of those traits you just spoke about? Like, are they the person that can read the races the best, strategy put in place the best? Is that the road captain that is the full package?
The road captain knows the parkour. He knows where the crosswind, so he can tell you, and then you can visualize it. Like say if I'm the sprinter of the day, I have to imagine being pinned on the barriers. I have to imagine which way the wind's coming. Okay, what direction? So that's what I'm thinking of, because I just trust my teammates that they are going to get me to that position to then enable my sprint. So that's what I visualize the sprint. I'm sprinting down the left-hand side of the barriers because the wind's coming from the right. And then I know my road captain, he's done all the work. He goes, okay, 50k out, crosswind, guys, we have to be here. So he's on the radio talking to us, so he's the planner, and he's visualized all that. And then the visualization from me as a sprinter, say for the day, is like, okay, what's my job? It's to finish it. Where am I going? I'm going down the left-hand barrier. Why am I doing that? The wind's coming from the right. Okay, if it gets blocked, what am I doing? So you just play out all these scenarios in your brain, and like I used to do that all the time. Greipel does it. I'm sure Caleb does it. I'm sure Cav does it. Robbie McEwen. It's like, but then you have to think of plan B and plan C and plan D. You can just see it in your brain.
And just to wrap up on this kind of changing a plan during a race topic that Tim and Peter talked about, just to bring it back to Zwift and a Zwift race. Now, your strength may be time trialing, for example. So in an ideal world, you're doing a Zwift race and you'd get away in a break, maybe mid-race, and then you'd plan to attack 5 kilometers from the end, or maybe just after a hill. However, the race pans out, and the way it pans out is that the pace is really on and someone else has attacked just before you were going to. So you have to reconsider your plan. And if you're well over threshold, just to stay with the front selection as attacks are going, making that big effort, that big attack into tipping into zone 5 and 6 isn't going to get you far. So that's going to be a complete waste of energy. So you're better off saving your pennies, changing your plan and perhaps attacking a little bit later once you've recovered slightly. Moving on to next comment. So the next comment from Brent Brookwalter, and Brent talks about the style and the pattern of a race. And I guess, let's listen to what Brent has to say first.
Yeah, I feel like usually in these long races, there's a little bit of a peak in the pace. Around 100K to go, which we saw about 4 laps to go. A little bit of a selection there, and then from there it just got lulled a little bit, and then ramped up, and just guys getting shot out the back the whole time.
Here we go. I mean, start of the race, I think Brent's there saying usually in these long races there's a peak around 100k to go, but I think the Worlds was a little bit out of the ordinary, and as you've mentioned, Greg, it was full gas from the start, right?
I think like we spoke about just before, it was just the first thing to take care of, and it's easy to take care of, is get rid of Sagan. So you go flat stick the first couple of laps, and you could see first couple of laps up the climb, Sagan was struggling, and then gone. So then the race changed. Then it became attacking. So yeah, it was. There's no question. Every single team, even though Sagan shouldn't make it to the final, they're still afraid of him. So that's why the race was, and I mean, if I was a sports director, I'd be saying exactly the same thing. This is what's going to happen, because you just don't know what Sagan's capable of.
Yeah, and that kind of pro style of racing in general, where it kind of gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Especially so, like the last hour is probably the quickest hour. That's probably very different to the style of racing for amateurs and lower cat riders, where it kind of starts fairly quick and then it'll settle down and be pretty chilled out right to the end. And I think in the US and the UK, they're very similar with their racing categories. So Cat 5 in the US and Cat 4 in the UK are basically the same, where you can expect to see a fast start and a fast finish, but it's pretty chilled out for a long time in the middle. And I think generally as you kind of rise through the ranks, kind of the higher quality, higher standard of racing, you get closer to that pro style of racing, where it's just that big continuous ramp, and the fastest hour is when you're the most tired at the end.
Well, it's kind of like the first hour was flat stick to establish a breakaway. So the first hour you'll often cover 50, 55 Ks. Once that break established, once everyone's happy, okay, perfect, that's enough riders, no more. And then absolutely it's the ramp, it's the 4-hour ramp. We call it the ramp test. Who can hold on the longest? It's just horrible.
And just on that, the 4-hour ramp, do you think the pro races need to be as long as they are, or do you think they could be doing with knocking them back by an hour or so, knocking them back by 40k in distance?
Ooh, yeah. Now this is a big long discussion we could get into.
That's a podcast in itself, there, mate.
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
In a nutshell, I think in
a nutshell is yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay, we'll leave it there then.
Yeah.
Cover that another time.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, that kind of wraps up the main part of today's podcast. So as usual, we kind of go on to the next section, which is cycling terminology. So I think it's my turn to describe a term. Have you got one for me?
Okay, cycling terminology. Rowie, you've got 30 seconds to describe this terminology. It's called, when I say go, you've got 30 seconds to describe suicide move.
Okay,
go.
Suicide. It's when kind of you attack in a crazy place, maybe way too early in an event, and you've got no chance of surviving to the finish. Basically, it's suicide. Now, you see it happen in the first few stages of the Tour de France sometimes. It's going to be a pretty much nailed-on bunch sprint. Guys are in the break. They're what I would call suicide moves, but with the added benefit for those guys of TV and sponsor exposure. And for amateurs, sometimes it's...
That's time, Matt.
There we go, brother.
There we go.
Yeah, well done.
I bet you've never done a suicide move.
I think you summed it up pretty well.
I bet you've never done a suicide move, Greg.
I did. I remember I got something happen. Oh, it started off the Tour, the Vuelta España one day. Started off with a bit of a descent on the neutral zone, and I just did this tuck behind the pace car, and then all of a sudden I had 30 seconds, and I had 3 guys with me. Stage 1, I'm like, oh, what am I doing? And next thing I've got 4 minutes. I'm like, oh, I do not want to be here. So I was like, oh, here we go. Suicide move. Exactly that, because it finished up a hill, you know. I was like, oh, mate, I just had the worst day of my life out there.
I sometimes call them mum and dad moves or mum and dad attacks, just attacking to show off to the family type thing as well.
No, I just felt like a goose, mate. I just felt like a goose. I actually wanted to stop, pull over and just take a pee and wait for the peloton.
Good stuff. Session. So as you all know, we attach a session to every podcast. Kev, you got a session for us?
Yeah, so continuing with our theme of Innsbruck Worlds and long climbing, we've got a climbing session here. Obviously, Zwift is the perfect platform to complete some long climbs. We've got Out to Zwift and the Telegraph climb, Tower climb, and other ones as well. But quite often with those climbs, you can't choose the cadence that you want to ride at. They become quite a hard slog. So with a structured climbing session, what we have here is 3 13-minute climbs, but each one has a set cadence target. So in the first effort, we're looking at a cadence of 85, and the intensity goes from zone 4 through to zone 5 and finishes with a minute above threshold at zone 6. In the second effort, same thing again, 13 minutes, but this time the target cadence is 80 revs, and in the last climb, it's 75 revs. Now, even though the intensity is quite low, what you'll notice through the 3 efforts is that the change of target cadence makes quite a difference. So it can be quite fatiguing riding at the lower cadence there because you're using different muscle fibers. So it's a good example of how Zwift can be used to create some structured workouts to recreate the demands of climbing. And that's what we've done in this session here with 3 13-minute climbs. So give it a go and let us know how you go with it and give us some feedback.
Good man. Climbing session. I'm sure people, Zwifters will lap that one up. I think climbing's always the one area that people want to improve on above everything else, I think, in my experience. So, all right, next part, guys. Quickfire question. So, the question is, sprint training, to do the sprints at the start of your training block on day 1 or at the end of your training block when you're fatigued?
I say have to go opposite at the end of the session.
Okay, I'm going to say...
It really does. It really depends, Matt.
Yeah, I'm going to say start as well.
It's a hard one. It's another podcast. It's another whole podcast.
Go on then. 30 seconds each. Explain why you've chosen Kev start and Greg end. Go on, Kev.
Okay, I'll go first. Because we want to make the biggest gains. We want to hit our peak power. We want to see what we're actually capable of. And then I would focus on achieving that power with fatigue in the legs. So my theory would be to hit the maximum sprint power that you can and train that, and then introduce the aerobic capacity to it later. And that's how most sprinters' seasons go.
Ta-dom! That's enough time, mate. You've had enough. And I totally agree.
Half an hour of this one.
Half an hour, that's 30 seconds, mate.
Just let me finish this sentence.
I totally agree. Absolutely. If you want peak power, boom, boom, boom. But if you want to do race simulation, it has to be at the end of the race. So I would train an athlete. If you want to hit massive peak power, yep, we do it fresh. But do you want to learn what it feels like to sprint at the end of a bike race? You do it at the end of training. It's really difficult. It's a really difficult conversation without the specifics.
There we go. Well, that's a long answer to a quick-fire question. I think it's definitely worth. Yeah. Should we do sprint training on our next podcast? Because I think you guys have got lots to give on this one.
I think we should.
We are. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Well, there you go. So I think the potted summary of the quick-fire question, sprint training, bit of both, and it depends. So we'll cover that in detail on the next podcast. On to the questions. So we got 3 questions today. Question 1, quite a long one. I'll read it all out. So this is from Maurice, and it was sent via email, saying, "Hello. Let's start to say that I really enjoy the podcast you make for Zwift. After the HIT podcast, I'm inspired to have done the under ones workout several times. Using erg mode, I find this session really doable, and I get some muscle sensation afterwards, although I have the feeling I can do harder and go for more. In contrast, the SST short session I perceive really hard. That brings me to my question. I like to race on Zwift, but the CCAT races look more like continuous sweet spot than zone 2 with bursts. Afterwards, I get so tired and it takes me too long to recover. Therefore, I don't do races regularly as I would like to. I'm not the best in recovery of efforts, 42 years old, and cycle approximately 4 to 5 hours a week. And this is the nuts and bolts. What do I do to get less tired in Zwift races? And how do I further build up the under one session, which I really like? And that's, again, from Maurice, which was sent via email. So thank you, Maurice. Kev, should we hand this one to you?
Yeah, this is a good question. And everyone that's experienced Zwift racing, we all know it's a sweet spot time trial effort. There's a few attacks, but they're generally pretty long sustained efforts. But what Maurice is doing here is ideal. Like to do the under one session and that style of training, he's going to spend more time at VO2 power and above than what he's going to do at a sweet spot session. So my thinking would be to implement more of that 40-20, 30-15 style of training where your heart rate's elevated for a long period of time. Even though the power's fluctuating, you're going to get more gains by targeting VO2 max aerobic system, and that's going to then make you more efficient in the racing at that sweet spot effort. So in a very quick answer, I think Maurice is doing the right thing. He could probably just introduce either some more intensity to his under one sessions or increase the amount of efforts that he's doing.
And I liked the fact that you said it was VO2 max aerobic session. It's like if you actually have a bigger aerobic base, it doesn't compromise anaerobic. Anaerobic just means you are forced in that condition to produce ATP without oxygen. And you can't train your body to do that. You can train your body to be adapted to it, but you can train aerobic. So it's a mistake when they say, oh, we want to do 40-20s anaerobic capacity. It's not actually anaerobic, it's aerobic. You still are building aerobic capacity. So don't be afraid of doing those longer sweet spot sessions, but you'll find with a Zwift race, it's going to be a really hard start. So yes, absolutely adjust your body to becoming familiar or being able to capable to handle that high lactate load for 3-4 minutes in the start, but then it still is an aerobic exercise, and the more aerobically fit you are, actually then you'll see your anaerobic capacity increase also.
Yeah, and another thing that Maurice could add to his sessions there is something we spoke about in a previous podcast about lactate shuttling. So we know that there's going to be high levels of lactate in these Zwift races. And the under one session by itself is very good, but to increase his lactate levels, if Maurice opened up with a 3 or 5 minute just above threshold effort, and then did the under one session, that'd be another stimulus to the session, and it's also going to be a different adaptation for him as well. So he could almost keep the same session, but just add that opening 3 or 5 minute time trial effort, and then he'll get some more adaptations from that.
Lovely. So for Zwift racing, we're saying under ones is a key session. The lactate shuffling is a key session. Have we got one more session that we can recommend for Zwift racing?
Yeah, don't forget that sweet spot session. That's the perfect session. It's absolutely builds aerobic capacity.
Good stuff. Two 50-minute blocks, 2 20-minute blocks, maybe 3 blocks. I guess depending on your ability, right?
Exactly that. Yeah. Yep, depending on ability, they're in there. They're built in there in Zwift already. You can find them.
There you go. There's your 3 go-to sessions for Zwift racing. Next question. And I think this one's for you, Greg. The question's from Martin Hirosh that was sent via Twitter. The question goes, how do you work out how long to start your sprint from? Should you base it on time or distance? So I think this means they've got a finish line. How far back from the finish do we start our sprint?
So we used to always, on the radio, I would always ask 3, maybe even 4 times out from the finish line, what direction is the wind? I always had to ask, where is the wind? Are you sure it's tailwind? I ask again, like 20 Ks out, 10 Ks out, one last time, 5 Ks out, which direction's the wind? It's tailwind. So it's absolutely done on time. You know you've got 20 seconds in your legs. It sometimes can be 300 meters, sometimes it can be 400 meters, it can be extended to 500 meters. Same with Greipel. He's got 15 seconds in his legs. It can be 250, sometimes he can go 300 meters. So absolutely it's time. It's you've got that you're just smashing massive amounts of ATP, and you've only got 10 seconds of that, then you go into massive glycolysis. So it's what you've trained for. You've got a certain time for your sprint, not distance.
And of course, gradient comes into it as well. Wind and gradient, Greg.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I said in the radio, I asked, is it a tailwind or is it a headwind? So if it's a tailwind, you're going to go 5 k's an hour faster. So your 200 meters is actually going to be, your 300 meters, they're going to be such a smaller time. So I remember, if you guys look at, here's one of the things I got asked quite often at the Worlds this year was, did Valverde start his sprint too early? And I'm like, no, he didn't. He started at 250 because he knows he can sprint 250. The reason it looked like it took forever is because it's at the end of 6 hours, it's the end of 260 kilometers, and they're not sprinters. So it's not like you're watching Kittel, Cavendish, and Greipel do the last 250 meters at 73 k's an hour. It's they've done 6.5 or whatever, 260 kilometers, so it looks like it takes forever, but they still have the same, capacity, the same physiological capacity for a sprint. They just don't have the power that these guys produce. So it looks like it takes them forever because they're going slower. But he did not start the sprint too early. He just he knows his distance. And just to throw a little bit in there, I remember racing as a kid, you'd have all the parents at the finish line kind of watching for the exciting bit. But my parents always used to stand at a kind of a strategic point, and it would normally be where we should start sprinting, because there's normally these kids races was split up quite a bit, and you'd be in a little group of maybe me and 10 other kids, and my dad would be stood, say 150 meters to go. And I would look to him, and when I got to him, that's why I start my sprint. And obviously, you don't rely on that as you get older, but you get trained into you, so you know how long you can sprint for. Then you get older, and you're 15, 16, and you've got it, and it's just in you. What a weapon, mate! So you would do that. Dad would stand there, and you'd sprint in there for 15th, 16th place. That's well done, bro.
Brutal. So something like that.
What a weapon.
Thing is, it's probably true, Greg.
I know the feeling,
and then
don't worry.
Stand on if we missed the podium, my dad would buy me a chocolate bar on the way home to make me feel good. Don't worry, son.
You can just stand beside the podium, mate. Doesn't matter.
When they've all gone home,
at least your parents were there.
When they've all gone home, just jump on for a quick.
That's
quick
true. Jump on once they've all left. Jump on for a quick photo.
Yeah, exactly. Quality.
Perfect.
All right. Next question is from Len Prosser that was sent in via email. So Len's question is, he's saying, in general, I can keep up with my local group of riders no problem for the first hour on the road. The second hour, I seem to struggle a bit more, and anything over 2 hours, I really struggle relative to my riding buddies. Any advice? I know I could train for longer, which would help, but I struggle for time around work and family. P.S. I can Zwift for 4 1-hour sessions a week, plus my weekend ride of up to 3 hours. So, just to kick this one off, I think the aim is to improve the Len's endurance, but I always say to riders, really evaluate when is it that you struggle and get dropped. Is it really endurance, where you slowly start to fade and kind of slip out the back, or does the group go really hard up a climb and start increasing the pace, and that's where you get dropped? And I would say it's probably you get dropped on a key section of the ride where they smash up a climb or they start doing a race for a sign. That's where you got dropped. Obviously, I'm not sure what you've been doing to date, Len, but in four Zwift sessions a week, I'm going to suggest we hit it really hard and do maybe 2 threshold-based sessions. So check them out in the workouts on Zwift, maybe various versions of the FTP intervals or the over-unders. And then 2 capacity-based sessions. So try and improve your 30-second to kind of 5-minute power, which involves completing and repeating those type of efforts. And that's going to enable you to produce more power for short durations that can help you get up the climbs and kind of get through those key points when most people get dropped. I think two key sessions are the ringer and the Gorby, which is 5-minute efforts at 110% of FTP. So you can check those out in workout mode.
No, they sound brilliant, mate. The only other one that you might want to add in every now and then, again, is that the one that builds that mitochondrial density, and that's the energy cell of the muscle, and that's that sweet spot session that we talked about. Maybe chuck one of them in a week. I mean, what do you think, Kev?
I think that's a great week that Len's got there. If I could do 4 1-hour Zwift sessions and a 3-hour ride in the weekend, that's a good little week there. So,
absolutely.
The key point there is that it's plenty of time to force change on the body. So normally we look for a minimum of 6 hours a week to be able to put enough stress on the body to force it to adapt and get stronger. So if Len's doing 4 Zwift sessions and a 3-hour endurance ride, he's got plenty of time to play around with the sessions there. And I really agree with what you said there, Matt. Without knowing all the specifics here, but if you can focus on that 30-second to 5-minute maximal power, that's normally the range that allows you to follow the moves that happen on long rides and allow you to stay with the front group or your mates. So yeah, focus on that VO2 max aerobic type work,
and obviously be able to do 4 1-hour Zwift sessions in the week. If you were doing 4 1-hour sessions on the road, you're not going to get the same training stress, which is one of the massive benefits of indoor training. It's hugely time efficient, and you guys have mentioned heat before, and muscle tension, and bang for buck. The turbo Zwift riding indoors, that's where you want to spend your time for people who've got busy lives, family, and jobs and the like. But yeah, I think 4 1-hour sessions, as we're all agreeing, is enough time to get some meaningful training done and make some real gains. Well, there you go, guys. That's episode 19. Comments on the worlds and the usual questions and that. Greg, Kev, good to chat. And we'll see you on the Sprint podcast next time.
Looking forward to it, mate. And good to catch up again. And we'll catch you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, go on. Thanks, guys, and we'll talk next time.